All right. Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, November 19th. This is your daily hit. I am Adam Jewell. Just a reminder, if you haven't yet, hit the like button, follow, share this with some of your friends, relatives, whatever it may be. Today, a little bit different than what I've been doing. I thought it would be really interesting to have a segment or have multiple segments on kind of get to know your leaders or your future leaders for that matter. And today, who I'm going to start with, because I think the guy is an incredibly interesting guy, is RFK Jr. Um, so, Robert F. Kennedy, everyone knows the Kennedys. The Kennedys are, American royalty, so to say. But if you don't know much about RFK, stick around because I got some really, really interesting and weird stuff to talk about. I will say that I am a Trump supporter, so I can be biased in what I say here. I try to go at this with kind of an unbiased opinion, but we'll see how this goes. You can rate my bias as we go along. But what I want to get started with, first off, just a little bit about RFK in general. So RFK Jr. is the son of Robert Kennedy Sr., who is up here within this family tree. His mother's name is Ethel, and his uncle on this left side over here is JFK, the President JFK. One quick thing to point out that's kind of related to today's world. When JFK was elected president, he elected his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, as Attorney General. So some people think that now, Trump selecting Matt Gaetz as AG, and only because Matt Gaetz is a loyalist and he doesn't have the qualifications, etc. It was kind of the same scenario when it was JFK, right? JFK got his brother to be his AG. I mean, how much more loyalty can there be than your brother, right? So some similar things that had happened in the past. But Robert F. Kennedy Sr. and Ethel had 11 children, which are not shown in this family tree. It goes very far down here. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., is one of 11. So quite a large family that they had. RFK, after high school and after college, was an environmental lawyer. He worked for 3 different places of note: River Keepers, which was protecting the Hudson River; the Natural Resource Defense Council (NRDC), working on water quality issues; and then Pace University. And he was a clinical professor and supervising attorney, where he was training law students. He also later in life founded the Children's Health Defense, or CHD, which is a very well-known organization for promoting vaccine misinformation and opposing public health measures, right? And we'll get into that in a little bit. The other interesting thing about RFK is that, his father was murdered, was assassinated during his presidential his presidential campaign, and RFK Jr. was 14 at the time when his father was killed. And when he was 15, he started using heroin and other drugs and became a heroin addict. And I believe he was an heroin addict, from what I've read, for almost 14 years. And the articles that I read talked about him shooting up speedballs, which were heroin and cocaine. So he has a pretty lengthy history of drug use, but for 14 years, essentially from age 15 to age 29, was an addict, and now is a recovered addict, and talks about it a lot on the campaign trail as well as public speeches that he gives. So the first thing that I want to talk about that has been talked about a lot during the campaign, kind of a weird thing with Kennedy, is the whale head, right? And there was a story that was published in Town and Country, I believe it was, where his granddaughter, or his, who is it here? RFK's granddaughter is talking about how at one point in time RFK was cruising down the road. There was a dead whale on the beach that he saw. He then went and took a chainsaw and sawed off the dead whale's head, put the head on top of the family van, and drove the head home to apparently just look at the skeleton and look at, anything else that might have been interesting in him. So incredibly weird story. I mean, I'm immediately reminded of like Jeffrey Dahmer when I hear this story and Picking Up Roadkill. Although, RFK has been an environmentalist and loves animals and does a ton of stuff with animals over his life, so maybe he really did just want to investigate what a dead whale skeleton and head looks like. But his granddaughter was the one that brought this to light. I'll share it. This is the Town and Country article that pointed this out. Camelot continued Kennedy's private tour of the family compounds. The granddaughter named Kick Kennedy. This is a picture of her right here. She loves dogs. She loves being adventurous, going on explorations with the family, etc. Pretty good article. But back to JFK. One thing to note: this is an AI-generated image, just to get some laughs here. A whale head on top of a van, but a really fascinating and just weird story about Kennedy. I'll move on. The second one with Kennedy was the dead bear in Central Park, right? And what had happened here is, I think this was about 10 years ago, somebody found a dead cub in Central Park alongside of a bicycle. And this is an actual picture from that day. This is the dead bear that you see kind of laying under the tree within some grass right here. Apparently this cub was a pretty small cub. I mean, it was about 40 pounds compared to, regular sized bears. That is incredibly small. But apparently what had happened is, RFK Jr. along with a couple of his buddies who he said were drinking at the time, came across a bear that had just gotten hit by a car, this cub that had just gotten hit by a car on the interstate. They thought he thought it would be a good idea to get the bear, put it in the car, bring it home, skin it, get the meat, and put the meat in the refrigerator, which, sounds kind of normal if you're into picking up roadkill and eating it. Not all that normal to me, but maybe some people. And stuff happened throughout the day which didn't allow him to do that, so his friends thought it would be a good idea and funny to take the bear as well as a bicycle that he had in the back of his car or van and put the bear in Central Park in Manhattan. So they put this bear on a bicycle in Central Park, and then, a day later somebody found it, and it was all over the news. For 10 years, no one knew who put this bear there or how this bear got placed in Central Park. I think the joke was supposed to be that like it was hit by the bike that they had, and that's how it died, but I don't really know. But let's see, there was a Roseanne Barr podcast that Kennedy had done where he talks with Roseanne about this entire story, and apparently someone caught wind of this, and RFK wanted to produce a video and get it on a podcast and get it out prior to the rest of the media spreading, information about it. But it's a 3-minute video. I'm not going to show you. You can go and check it out yourself. Just, type in at X Kennedy and Roseanne. It's one of the first videos. He talks about this bear that, was roadkill that they put in the van and apparently later on put in Central Park. So another very weird, eccentric, oddball story coming from JFK, right? I'll move on here. The next one is the story about RFK apparently eating a dog. And you can see the picture that I have here. This is, what happened was RFK apparently sent this picture to a friend, joking about going to one of the best restaurants in Korea where they serve dog. And he shared this picture in a text message. And apparently that was just a joke, right? But some started to think it was an actual dog that he was eating here. And one of the main reasons being dogs have 13 ribs. Not a lot of other animals have 13 ribs. You can count how many ribs are in the picture, and there are 13. Later, when RFK was questioned about it when it came out, after a friend leaked it or it got leaked somehow, he said, no, that's not a dog. That was a complete joke. That was a goat. Well, then, it was like Snopes had to come around and do the fact check on the dog versus goat, and it turns out that this was not a dog. It was not a goat. It was a lamb. So fact check, photo does not show RFK Jr. eating dog or goat. It was actually a lamb. So again, why was he eating a lamb? I think he was somewhere in South America. They took a picture of him eating a lamb. RFK has a really weird life of traveling all over the place, going on crazy trips, kayaking, hiking. I mean, the Kennedys in general, really have the ability to do whatever they please, seeing as though they're kind of, like I said, American royalty, and they have, a lot of opportunities. And he's done some incredibly weird and interesting things. So that was number 3, dog eating, which it wasn't a dog. He didn't eat a dog. It was a picture of a lamb, and the media went with a crazy story. Let's move on here. So the next one was him having a brain worm. And in one of his campaign speeches, he slipped out that at one time he had a worm within his brain, and it ate part of his brain before it died, and that's what had caused him some mental cloudiness, slash brain fog. So this is, pretty much true. I mean, apparently he did get a parasite, a tapeworm, from eating, undercooked or bad pork, I believe it is, while in South America. And I think this was like 2010 when this occurred. Someone could fact check me on that, but he did get tapeworm, and he did have to go on some medication to kill it, but it is gone and it is no longer in his brain. And it was just a really weird thing for somebody to bring up on the campaign trail about a worm in your brain that ate some of your brain and now is dead. Those are probably stories that you should just not tell people for various reasons. But another weird oddball story about RFK Jr. So number 5 I have here was a story about where he apparently claims that COVID was a Chinese bioweapon that was manufactured to be ethnically targeted, right? Where you can see here, targeted to attack Caucasians and black people and to spare Ashkenazi, if I'm saying that right, Jews and Chinese people. And then it goes on. If you watch this clip, I can play this clip for you because it's pretty short. I'll play at least some of it here.
Talk about bioweapons. The level, I know a lot now about bioweapons because I've been doing a book on it for the past 2.5 years, and the technology that we now have to develop these microbes, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted.
So that's where the news came out of, right? That last sentence of COVID-19, there's an argument where that was ethnically targeted. And you heard him talk about the hundreds of millions that the U.S. puts into these bioweapons, the Chinese as well. But that's where the media then took that and said, RFK said COVID was a Chinese bioweapon, which was ethnically targeted. Well, okay, there is a bit of reality to this, I guess. Right? I mean, I followed the breadcrumb trail of this, and this is the paper, and you can go out and check this out. Is at pubmed.ncbi.nim.nih.gov, where it talks about COVID-19 and how it affects different ethnicities, right? And so I mean, I will say there's a little bit of legitimacy to his argument, but it may be a little bit misconstrued or said wrong or whatever it is. But I mean, also look at the setting, right? The guy's sitting at a dinner table talking with people and talks about this, and it was probably wrong. It probably is wrong. Kind of just stupid to talk about. It does get into the realm of conspiracies. But there is some backing to it, and he does point to a specific article that was published because of it. So that was number 5. The COVID was a Chinese bioweapon. All right, we'll move on. Number 6. The claim here, and this was all over the news, was that RFK is anti-vax. He spoke out a lot about the COVID vaccination when that was occurring. And the claim is that he said that anti-vaxxers suffered worse oppression than Anne Frank via the Nazis, right? And this was all over the news. It was written in this Vanity Fair article. I'll show this Vanity Fair article in a little bit, but if you have never read this article, I suggest you go and read it because it's a pretty long article, and it's actually a really, really interesting read just because of how fascinating the Kennedy family really is. But this is the claim. The anti-vax suffered worse oppression than Anne Frank. Kind of, is this real? Is this not real? Well, what did RFK actually say about this? In an article from Politico that you can see here, it says, RFK apologizes for widely condemned Anne Frank comment. Well, what is he apologizing for? Within the article, you can actually find the quote that he apologizes for. It says, even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland. You could hide in the attic like Anne Frank did. So he was talking about people that were against the vaccine and how, they were being oppressed in the United States and elsewhere. Everyone knows the story about that. And then, using the analogy of the Nazis, World War II, and the Jews to say that even then you could go and cross the Alps to Switzerland. And, I mean, that's all this is doing is, using a fantastic analogy when one didn't or shouldn't have been used. I think it was dumb for him to use a comment like this, but I mean, he really didn't even say that, anti-vaxxers were suffering oppression more than the Jews in Nazi Germany. He didn't say that. He just, wanted to make a point of the suffering or oppression, so to say, of anti-vaxxers, said something fantastic and stupid and wasn't useful, but, it kind of turned into the conspiracy that he thought anti-vaxxers were oppressed so hard. I mean, that's not really what was said here. It was just conversation where he said a very large thing that shouldn't have been said. Right. We'll move on to the next one. So, the next one here, there was a woman, and this came from the Vanity Fair article as well, who accused RFK of sexual assault. And this was actually his children's babysitter at the time, and also worked with him in one of the law practices that he had, and lived in their house. And let's see, oops, I'm sorry. Give me a minute here. So I wanted to know what the actual sexual assault is, and I say that because you see this term getting thrown around everywhere about sexual assault. Sometimes it turns out to be, an advance, or something as simple as, somebody grabbed somebody else's butt when they were 23 years old or something like that. I always just want to know what sexual assault actually means when I hear that, right? So I dug into it just a bit, and in the article that I'm showing here, I'll read a part of this. It says, a few months later, Cooney says she was rifling through the kitchen pantry for lunch after a yoga class, still in her sports bra and leggings, when Kennedy came up behind her, blocked her inside the room, and began groping her, putting his hands on her hips and sliding them up along her rib cage and breasts. Right? And when Kennedy was questioned about this, you can see here one of his response was that he is not a church boy, and I have so many skeletons in my closet. And in other articles or interviews, even you've probably heard RFK say, or maybe you haven't, he says it quite often, I have so many skeletons that if they were allowed to vote, I'd become the, king of the world or something like this, right? Just making jokes about it. But he didn't deny this. I think in the apology that he issued, he did say, I don't remember doing that, but if I did, I'm very sorry. And, he is kind of clearly saying that he did a lot of dumb shit when he was a kid or when he was younger or whatever it may be. So, did he do this? Most likely, yep. Most likely he probably did. All right. The next one, let's see here. The next one is kind of one of the biggest ones RFK is known for, which is just the anti-vax RFK, right? RFK is very well known. Some people call him crazy, the anti-vaxxer movement, conspiracy theorists, blah, blah. Well, RFK started this company or this foundation, whatever it is, called Children's Health Defense. It is all about, healthcare, vaccinations. You can see the mission. I put the mission and the vision down below. This comes directly from their website. I just kind of took it from another site and put it on the same page for you. But you can see the vision says, a world free of childhood chronic health conditions caused by environmental exposures, with the mission being, our mission is ending childhood health epidemics by eliminating toxic exposure. We'll restore and protect the health of children by eliminating environmental exposures, holding responsible partners or parties accountable, and establishing safeguards to prevent future harm of children's health. Okay, I mean, pretty good sounding vision and pretty good sounding mission, right? And then you can click a little further as to what's in this website and what he goes into talking about. One of the things that I want to throw in there, just as a disclaimer, this is not from their site, this is a different site, but this is clearly, there is clear evidence out there that vaccines are very, very effective and very useful. You can see the chart here taken from Our World in Data, talking about the number of cases for every one of these diseases, along with the deaths that occurred and how many were, eliminated through vaccines. And there's a ton of evidence and proof that vaccines are very, very, very effective, right? I think what RFK and a lot of people talk about is, certain things in vaccines, how they're administered, meaning, how much of a dosage do you get during each administration, and, whether or not it's necessary for every absolute person, etc. So this pic I'm showing right here, I did pull directly from his website. If you click on vaccine, you can go into it. It says what's in a vaccine, and it talks about the different toxicity levels of different elements, and how the CDC recommended vaccine schedule. Every time you're given these vaccines, you're going over the threshold of toxicity levels for these different elements. And, there's a lot of information on his site that is kind of showing, the old correlation of vaccines to people getting sick, or correlation of vaccines to autism, or whatever it may be. He does state on his website that correlation does not always lead to causation. The majority of us know that. But I think with somebody that has this much of a public figure, um, most people that are calling him loony or calling him crazy, crazy anti-vaxxer, are, basically saying that because of who he is, because of how big of a public figure he is, when you bring attention to these types of questions around vaccines, you are going to make people lose their trust in vaccines and then not take them. While, the last chart that I just showed, where that vaccines have obvious efficacy, right? And I am of the opinion that, vaccines are good. You can clearly see the results from vaccines. Life expectancy has gone up, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, However, I think RFK is asking some really, really good questions about vaccines that should be asked. I don't think he's wrong for doing this. I wish his site or his, uh, this organization, they put a lot of money behind lawyers and behind other things to fight vax mandates and this kind of thing. I wish they would put their energy more towards proving some of the claims, proving the causation that they show a chart of essentially, but then underneath say, correlation doesn't lead to causation, but you're kind of implying that by the chart that you're showing. I wish they would put some money and resources into trying to prove or disprove the actual causation, right? Um, so it's kind of like, okay, there's your claim, put your money where your mouth is, right? That's my opinion. I think it's good to ask these questions. I think the public should. I'm all in favor of asking questions about this. Maybe vaccines do terrible things. My wife and I mean, we have 2 kids. Every time they're up for vaccines, we will not allow the doctors to give our children more than 2 vaccines in the same day. Just because everything that's being injected into them, we thought, hey, we'll still do the vaccines. Let's just spread it out a little bit more. So everyone to each their own. But I definitely think that what he's doing, he's asking the right questions. He's not claiming anything is particularly bad or not to take them. Or maybe he did a bit when there was the COVID vaccine. However, this is more about questioning science and questioning the correlation to some other things like deaths, like autism, etc. Where good, I think they're relevant questions. I think we should be asking them. I think we should be studying them. But again, my suggestion would be put money and put resources into proving or disproving, doing experiments rather than litigating. All right. And I think that is it for today. Last point I'm showing right here. Part of this Vanity Fair article that keeps getting pointed back to has said, something about how his family was describing him, where they use the term, savior complex that drives him to take up these causes and there we go. That drives him to take up these causes. A savior complex. He wants to be the hero, right? He wants the publicity, right? This is said by a lot of his family. A lot of his family doesn't support him at all. It doesn't support him in any of the claims that he's made. Didn't support his presidential bid. They are very much Democrats. They supported Biden, although apparently there were mixed feelings on that as well. But he got very, very little support. I think it said that like one cousin supported him in his presidential bid, especially when he realigned with Trump and the Republican Party. But they see him as having this savior complex, this hero complex of, going against the man, going against the establishment. He's going to be the one to save everybody. He loves the attention. They kind of liken it to just as he had the addiction to heroin and whatnot. He has an addiction to publicity now, and he has an addiction to being the hero and to being the savior. And honestly, it kind of makes sense to me. I look at all the things RFK talks about, and what he does. I can kind of see that. I mean, maybe the family is spinning it that way because that's how he looks, but I mean, I kind of get it. The other thing that they talk about with him is that he's got so much confidence in what he says, and he says things with such authority, but those things can be just outright lies, or small white lies, or myth truth, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, I kind of see that too. There's a lot of people like this that I always look up to and I envy and go, man, those guys know so many stats and so many people and so many names and everything right off the top of their heads. And then I read something where they're talking about a family going, yeah, it's just so much confidence. He says whatever he wants to say without a lot of it even being true. And I go, oh, maybe the guy just is overconfident and just talking and talking. You can't sit there and fact check every freaking thing you hear at every moment of the day. Sometimes you got to believe people or not believe people. That being said, when you have high-ranking political figures and they potentially are, spitting out, spitting out fake claims constantly, that's not a good thing either, right? So, I don't really know, what percentage is real, what percentage isn't, but RFK, incredibly interesting guy. Now being put in charge of the NIH, I think it is, National Institute of Health. Is that right? Um, Incredibly interesting guy. Like I said, there's way more to talk about regarding RFK, and maybe I'll do a couple more series where I go a little bit more in depth on each one of these. I'm definitely going to be talking about some of the other, cabinet members as well, right? Because uh, there's some really interesting people in this cabinet, right? Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth. I did kind of one on him already. Elon Musk, Vivek, some really interesting people, and it's always good to kind of get to know your leaders. I also want to talk about some of the other things around RFK because, today I talked about kind of all the oddball, weird conspiracy things. There's some other policy things that I do want to discuss to somewhat, be fair to him. But I think that's it for today. Remember to like, remember to follow. I'm going to dive more into different people as we go on here, so you're going to want to see some of that. If you have any other questions, comments, maybe other things that you found really interesting about this segment or things that you know about RFK that I don't, send them in the comments. I'll be sure to talk about them on the next video. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you next time.